Have you ever wondered how a human body could survive in a world where the air itself feels sharp enough to cut the lungs? Where winter lasts most of the year, and where a single mistake in the cold can quietly erase a life within minutes? Picture a landscape that seems almost empty at first glance, a wide white horizon stretching beneath a pale sun that barely rises above the edge of the earth. Snow drifts across frozen rivers, wind whispers over ice older than memory. The silence feels enormous, as if the land itself has forgotten how to speak. And yet, for thousands of years, people lived here. Families walked across these frozen plains. Fires flickered inside skin tents. Children learned to read the wind the way others read books. Entire cultures flourished in a place that appears, to modern eyes, almost impossible to inhabit. What shaped the knowledge that allowed them to survive? What secrets were carried quietly from one generation to the next, long before written history? And how did the human body and mind slowly learn to live with cold so deep that metal can shatter and breath turns instantly to frost? If this story helps you relax, maybe consider subscribing. But only if it feels right. It's a small gesture, but it genuinely helps keep these quiet journeys through deep time possible. And if you're still awake for a moment, tell me where you're listening from. I read those comments like tiny stars on a map, each one marking another quiet traveller somewhere in the world. Now take a slow breath in and let it fall away. Feel the quiet around you settle. Let the edges of your day soften. Make yourself comfortable wherever you are and allow the world to grow a little quieter. Now let's drift backward, far beyond cities, beyond roads, beyond the warmth of modern homes, back to a time when survival in the coldest places on Earth depended not on technology, but on patience, memory, and a deep understanding of the frozen world itself. Long before maps drew the shape of the northern continents, you find yourself standing at the edge of a world that feels almost unfinished. The air is thin and painfully cold, carried across endless plains of snow and wind-smoothed ice. Yet somewhere ahead, faint footprints mark a path through the drifts. These are not the tracks of animals, but of people who learned, slowly and carefully, that even the harshest climates hold hidden rhythms. They discovered that survival here is not about conquering the cold, but about listening to it. You stand quietly for a moment and allow the landscape to settle around you. The Arctic does not rush. Wind slides softly across the frozen ground, lifting loose crystals of snow that sparkle briefly in the low light before settling again. The sun hangs near the horizon, pale and distant, casting long shadows that stretch across the tundra like slow-moving rivers of blue. At first glance, this land appears empty, but it is not. Beneath the snow lie the faint signs of life that only patient observers learn to see. A curved ridge where the wind has carved the surface, a slight depression where animals passed hours earlier, the distant movement of a herd of caribou, their bodies dark against the pale horizon. And somewhere in this quiet landscape, people walk. Archaeologists believe humans began moving into the far northern regions of the planet tens of thousands of years ago, following migrating animals across enormous stretches of land that no longer exist today. During colder periods of Earth's climate history, sea levels dropped dramatically. This exposed wide corridors of land between continents. One of the most famous of these was a vast region connecting Asia and North America, now lost beneath the Bering Sea. But in that distant time, it was a broad plain of grass, rivers, and open sky. Through this land, groups of early humans slowly travelled. Not all at once, not in a single migration, but in countless small journeys spread across generations. You imagine walking beside them now. Your breath forms small clouds in the cold air. Your boots press softly into the snow. Ahead, a group of hunters moves quietly across the frozen ground, their clothing layered with animal skins carefully stitched together with bone needles. Nothing about their movement is rushed. Every step is deliberate. They are listening, because here, the Arctic always speaks first. The wind shifts direction. A faint cracking sound echoes somewhere far away where sea ice slowly flexes with the tides. A distant flock of birds turns sharply in the sky. Each of these signals carries meaning. Over centuries, the first Arctic peoples learned that survival here depended not on strength or speed, but on attention. The landscape constantly offers small clues about what is happening beyond the horizon. The thickness of ice, the movement of animals, the approach of storms, even the colour of the sky at certain times of day. To outsiders, these details might seem insignificant, but to those who live here, they are the difference between safety and danger. You continue walking through the cold air, imagining what it must have felt like for the first communities who chose to remain in these northern regions. The winters would have been long, the food unpredictable, and the cold sometimes brutal. Yet they stayed, because slowly, something remarkable happened. What once seemed like an impossible environment began to reveal patterns. Animals returned along the same migration routes. Sea ice formed and broke apart in predictable cycles. Certain valleys offered shelter from the wind. Certain rivers remained rich with fish even in the coldest seasons. The Arctic was not random chaos. It was a system, a slow, powerful rhythm of seasons, ice, animals and light. And the people who learned to live here began weaving their lives into that rhythm. They became watchers of the horizon, students of the snow, listeners to the quiet language of cold landscapes. Think about that for a moment. Thousands of years before modern meteorology, before satellite imagery, before insulated jackets or heated homes, human beings stood in this frozen world and learned to survive using nothing but observation, cooperation, and patience. Their footprints may have vanished from the snow long ago, but the knowledge they carried forward would shape Arctic cultures for countless generations. As you drift further back through time, the world grows colder still. Vast glaciers move slowly across continents like silent mountains in motion. Sea levels fall. Entire forests disappear beneath ice that can be thousands of feet thick. Yet even during these immense ice ages, pockets of life remain along the Arctic edges. In these fragile margins, humans begin testing the limits of endurance in a climate that rarely forgives mistakes. You feel the cold deepen around you, not the quick chill of winter in a modern city, but the deep persistent cold of an ice age world. The kind of cold that settles into the bones of the planet itself. During the height of the last glacial period, enormous ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. In North America, the Laurentide ice sheets stretched across vast regions, reaching miles in thickness in some places. In northern Europe and Asia, similar glaciers slowly pushed across the land. These were not frozen landscapes in the way we imagine winter today. They were moving bodies of ice, slow, silent, relentless. Over thousands of years, glaciers reshape entire continents. They grind mountains into fine powder, carve valleys through solid rock, and push massive boulders across landscapes like pieces on a board no human can see. Standing at the edge of such a glacier would feel like standing beside a frozen ocean wall, a pale cliff stretching endlessly across the horizon. And yet, even during these extreme conditions, life finds space to continue. South of the largest ice sheets, vast grasslands appear. These are sometimes called mammoth steppes, wide-open plains where cold-adapted animals roam in enormous herds. Woolly mammoths move slowly across the tundra. Steppe bison graze through wind-blown grasses. Giant deer lift their antlers against the cold sky. Predators follow, wolves, lions adapted to colder climates, and eventually humans. You imagine yourself walking across this ancient plain. The air is sharp and dry. Snow drifts lightly across patches of grass that survive beneath the frost. The sun sits low, casting golden light across a landscape that seems both beautiful and unforgiving. For early human communities, these environments offered both opportunity and risk. Large herds meant food. But the cold demanded constant preparation. Shelter had to be built quickly, clothing had to be carefully designed, fire had to be protected at all costs. One small mistake could become deadly in a matter of hours. And yet, these early humans did not simply endure the Ice Age, they adapted to it. Over generations, knowledge accumulated. Hunters learned how to track animals across snow-covered ground. Families developed new methods for preserving meat in the freezing air. Communities discovered which materials worked best for insulation, and which types of terrain offered the most protection from wind. These discoveries were not written down. They were remembered, shared through stories, demonstrations, and quiet observation. A child watching an elder build a shelter. A young hunter learning how to read the movement of caribou across distant hills. A family passing down techniques for sewing layered clothing from carefully prepared hides. Slowly, a culture of cold weather survival began to emerge. Think about the scale of that process. Thousands of years of experimentation, thousands of winters survived, each generation adding small improvements to the knowledge inherited from the one before. Modern technology often arrives suddenly, but ancient survival knowledge grows slowly, like ice itself, layer by layer, season by season, until eventually entire cultures exist that understand the frozen world in ways few outsiders ever could. You look across the Ice Age landscape once more. The wind moves softly across the grass. In the distance, a small group of humans continues walking across the open plain. They are not lost. They are not wandering without purpose. They are following a path their ancestors began long before, a path leading deeper into the cold and deeper into the quiet mastery of survival. To survive here, you begin to notice something remarkable. Snow is not just snow. It has textures, sounds, and shapes that reveal secrets to those who pay attention. Some layers hold your weight, others collapse beneath your feet. Wind-carved ridges tell stories about approaching storms. Over generations, Arctic tribes develop a quiet fluency in this frozen language, reading the ground the way sailors read the sea. At first, all snow looks the same, a white surface stretching across the land in soft waves and gentle slopes. But as you walk further into this frozen environment, subtle differences begin to appear. The snow beneath your boots changes texture. Sometimes it feels firm, almost solid. Other times it collapses slightly, releasing a faint crunching sound that echoes softly through the cold air. To someone unfamiliar with the Arctic, these differences might seem trivial, but to those who live here, they are deeply meaningful. Snow carries information. Layers of snow accumulate throughout the winter, each storm leaving behind a thin record of wind, temperature, and moisture. Some layers form tight crystals that bond together strongly. Others remain loose and fragile, easily collapsing under pressure. Hunters learn to recognize these variations immediately. A strong snow layer can support the weight of a sled or a traveling group. A weak one might hide dangerous pockets of air beneath the surface. Over centuries, Arctic communities develop incredibly detailed knowledge about snow types. In many northern languages, there are numerous words describing different snow conditions, each one capturing subtle distinctions that matter deeply for survival. Fresh powder drifting softly in calm air, wind-packed snow hardened into smooth surfaces, granular crystals formed after days of sunlight and refreezing. Each variety behaves differently underfoot. Each one tells a story about the weather that created it. You kneel down and touch the surface. Tiny crystals sparkle like fragments of glass. The wind passes over them, shaping the snow into small ridges known as sastrugi, delicate formations that reveal the direction and strength of past storms. Even these small shapes carry meaning. Experienced travellers can look across a frozen plain and immediately know which way the wind has been blowing for days, sometimes even weeks. This knowledge becomes essential for navigation. In a landscape where landmarks are rare and storms can erase tracks within hours, the shape of the snow itself becomes a guide. But the language of snow goes deeper still. Snow also affects sound. Cold air allows sound waves to travel farther, and soft snow absorbs noise differently depending on its structure. Hunters learn how to move silently across certain snow types, while avoiding others that produce sharp, echoing crunches. Imagine waiting near a seal's breathing hole in the ice. The animal surfaces only occasionally, sometimes after long periods underwater, if your footsteps create the wrong sound. Even from a distance, the seal will disappear beneath the ice before you ever see it. So you learn to walk gently, slowly, listening not just to the world around you, but also to the snow beneath your own feet. Think about how extraordinary this skill becomes over time. In modern cities, we often move across paved ground without ever noticing the surface beneath us. But here, every step carries information. The ground is alive with subtle signals. The Arctic teaches patience. It rewards careful attention. And for those who listen closely enough, even something as simple as snow becomes a vast library of environmental knowledge. You stand up again and look across the white horizon. The landscape appears quiet, but beneath that silence, countless small messages are written across the snow. Stories of wind, stories of temperature, stories of animals passing in the night. And if you learn to read them, the frozen world begins to speak. In the endless cold, fire becomes something more than warmth. It becomes survival itself. You imagine small flames flickering inside shelters built from bone, hide, and snow. Every spark must be protected from the wind. Every ember carries the difference between comfort and danger. Over centuries, Arctic cultures master the delicate balance of maintaining fire in landscapes where fuel is rare and the cold never truly leaves. You crouch beside a small circle of stones partially buried in the snow. Inside the ring, faint blackened marks reveal where flames once burned. At first, it seems like an ordinary fire pit, but here, in the Arctic, fire is never ordinary. In warmer regions of the world, wood can be gathered from forests almost anywhere. Fallen branches, dried leaves, and tree bark provide easy fuel for cooking and warmth. But the far north offers very little wood. Large trees rarely grow in the cold tundra. Instead, Arctic communities must become creative. Driftwood carried by distant rivers sometimes washes ashore along Arctic coasts. These pieces of wood may have travelled hundreds, or even thousands of miles before arriving here. Each fragment becomes valuable, carefully collected, stored, protected from moisture. Animal fat also becomes an important fuel source. Rendered seal oil can burn slowly in specially designed lamps, producing steady heat and light even in the darkest months of winter. Inside traditional Arctic homes, these lamps glow quietly, their small flames warming the surrounding air and allowing families to cook food and melt ice for drinking water. You imagine sitting inside such a shelter now. The outside world is locked in deep cold, but inside the air feels surprisingly gentle. The flickering light from the lamp reflects off the smooth walls of snow or hide. Shadows move slowly across the interior as people talk quietly, repair tools, and prepare food. The fire becomes the centre of life. It cooks meat. It melts snow. It dries clothing soaked with melting frost. And perhaps most importantly, it brings people together. In such a harsh environment, warmth is both physical and social. The presence of fire creates a small island of comfort in a vast ocean of ice. But maintaining fire in the Arctic requires constant attention. Wind can extinguish flames quickly. Fuel supplies must be carefully rationed, and every spark must be protected during travel. Imagine carrying a small ember across miles of frozen land, shielding it from the wind with your hands and carefully feeding it with bits of fuel along the way. For many ancient communities, this was a common practice. Fire was not easily replaced, so it was guarded carefully, almost like a living companion. Think about that for a moment. A small flame carried across a frozen continent, a fragile glow of warmth and light moving through one of the coldest environments on Earth. It is a quiet reminder of something remarkable about human survival. Even in the deepest cold, a single ember can hold the promise of warmth, and as long as that ember survives, so do the people who carry it. The animals of the Arctic carry their own solutions to the cold. Caribou grow hollow hairs that trap heat. Arctic foxes wear coats thicker than any natural fabric. Early tribes observed these details with careful patience. Soon, clothing evolves into something astonishingly effective. Layered skins sewn with bone needles, designed not just for warmth but for flexibility, breathability, and protection from deadly wind. You kneel beside a stretched animal hide laid across the snow, its surface pale and thick beneath your hands. At first it appears simple, just skin. But to the people who live here, this material represents thousands of years of careful observation. Long before synthetic insulation or woven fabrics, Arctic communities studied the animals around them, noticing how they thrived in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin within minutes. Caribou became one of the most important teachers. Their fur is remarkable. Each hair is hollow, forming tiny pockets that trap warm air close to the body. This natural insulation is so effective that a caribou can remain comfortable even when winter temperatures drop far below freezing. Early Arctic hunters learned that wearing these hides could offer similar protection. But it was not enough to simply drape a skin over the shoulders. The secret lay in careful construction. You imagine sitting beside a small group of skilled makers as they work slowly and patiently. Bone needles pass through the thick hides with quiet precision. Threads made from animal sinew pull the seams tight, creating clothing that blocks wind while allowing moisture to escape. Layering becomes essential. One garment might be worn with the fur facing inward, holding warmth against the body. Another layer might face outward, shielding the wearer from snow and wind. Together they create a flexible barrier between the human body and the brutal cold of the Arctic. Think about how ingenious this system is. Modern winter clothing often relies on complex synthetic materials and advanced manufacturing techniques. Yet Arctic peoples developed garments capable of surviving some of the coldest conditions on Earth, using only natural resources and careful craftsmanship. The design is not accidental. Hoods are shaped to protect the face from biting wind. Sleeves allow free movement for hunting and travel. Mittens attach with cords so they cannot be lost in deep snow. Even the seams themselves matter. Loose stitching would allow icy air to enter. Tight seams keep warmth contained, forming a protective shell around the body. But clothing in the Arctic is never static, it changes with the seasons. During colder months, thicker furs are used. In milder periods, lighter garments allow heat to escape more easily. Moisture management becomes especially important. Sweat that freezes against the skin can quickly become dangerous in extreme cold. So Arctic clothing must breathe. You imagine stepping outside wearing these carefully crafted garments. The wind pushes against your body, but it cannot penetrate the layers of fur. Snow gathers along the surface of the coat without melting, easily brushed away before it can soak into the fabric. Inside, your body heat remains trapped within the small air pockets created by the fur. Warmth travels with you. Think about that for a moment. In an environment where temperatures can drop far below what the human body normally tolerates, survival depends not on resisting the cold directly, but on creating small islands of warmth wherever you go. Clothing becomes a portable shelter, a moving refuge, and through generations of observation and experimentation, Arctic tribes mastered the quiet science of insulation. The animals of the north taught them well, and by listening carefully to those lessons, humans discovered that even in the coldest places on Earth, warmth could still be carried on the body itself. Nothing in the Arctic stays the same for long. Herds migrate, ice breaks apart, seasons shift in slow but powerful rhythms. So human communities learn to move with the land itself. Entire villages become mobile. Shelters are built to appear and disappear quickly, leaving almost no trace behind except faint memories in the snow. You stand on a wide stretch of tundra as the wind carries soft grains of snow across the ground. Behind you, the camp that stood here only days earlier has vanished. No buildings remain, no permanent walls, only faint impressions in the snow where tents once stood and where sled runners carved gentle lines across the frozen earth. For Arctic communities, permanence was never the goal. Movement was. The animals they depended on did not remain in one place. Caribou herds migrated across enormous distances each year. Seals appeared in different regions depending on the shifting patterns of sea ice. Fish gathered in certain rivers during brief seasonal windows. To survive, human communities learned to follow these patterns. Villages became travelling ecosystems. Families packed their belongings onto sleds pulled by dogs. Tools, hides, lamps and food supplies were carefully organised so they could be moved quickly when the time came to follow migrating animals or retreat from advancing storms. You imagine the quiet activity of departure. Snow blocks from winter shelters are gently dismantled. Skin tents are folded and secured. Children help gather small tools while hunters check their sled harnesses. There is no panic, only rhythm. These movements happen every year, generation after generation. Over time, Arctic peoples developed detailed mental maps of the land, remembering thousands of subtle landmarks that guide travel across terrain that often appears identical in every direction. A distant hill shaped like a sleeping animal. A cluster of dark stones along the edge of a frozen river. A valley that blocks the strongest winter winds. These markers become part of a living geography passed down through stories and experience. Imagine travelling across such landscapes without roads, compasses, or satellite navigation. Your only guides are memory, observation, and the quiet advice of elders who have crossed these regions many times before. And yet, these communities travelled vast distances with remarkable accuracy. Some Arctic groups covered hundreds of miles throughout the year, following seasonal cycles that ensured access to food and shelter. The architecture of mobility shaped everything. Tents made from animal skins could be assembled quickly using lightweight poles. Snow shelters could be built within hours using simple tools and knowledge of how snow behaves when cut and stacked. Nothing was unnecessarily heavy. Every object had a purpose. This efficiency allowed communities to remain flexible, responding to sudden changes in weather, animal migration, or sea ice conditions. Think about how different this way of life is from the modern world. Today, many of us build permanent homes designed to protect us from the environment outside. But Arctic cultures developed a different strategy. Instead of forcing the land to adapt to them, they adapted to the land. Their homes could move, their villages could vanish overnight, and the land itself remained largely untouched. This relationship created a kind of balance. Human presence existed within the natural cycles of the Arctic rather than against them. When a region's resources began to thin, communities moved onward, allowing the land time to recover before they returned again in future seasons. You look across the snow-covered tundra once more. The camp may be gone, but the people are not lost. They're already far away now, travelling across the frozen horizon, following the quiet paths their ancestors have walked for thousands of years. In the Arctic, survival belongs to those who understand one simple truth. Sometimes the safest home is the one that moves with you. Your own body begins revealing quiet adaptations to the cold. Blood flow changes. Fingers and toes learn to survive freezing temperatures longer than expected. Metabolism shifts slightly, producing more heat from the same food. While these changes are subtle, they show how humans slowly adjusted to the Arctic environment over thousands of years. You take a slow breath, feeling the cold air enter your lungs. At first it stings. The sharp dryness of Arctic air can feel almost painful to someone unfamiliar with it. But over time, the body begins to adapt in small but meaningful ways. One of the most important changes involves blood flow. When exposed to cold temperatures, the human body naturally reduces circulation to the outer extremities. Blood is redirected toward vital organs in the chest and abdomen, protecting the brain and heart from dangerous heat loss. This process is known as vasoconstriction. It helps conserve warmth, but it also places fingers, toes, and ears at risk of freezing. Yet something interesting happens among people who live in extremely cold climates for long periods. Their bodies begin developing slightly different responses. Studies of Arctic populations have shown that some individuals experience periodic bursts of increased blood flow to their hands and feet during cold exposure. This process, sometimes called cold-induced vasodilation, briefly warms the extremities before circulation tightens again. It acts like a quiet safety system, a pulse of warmth that helps prevent frostbite during extended exposure to freezing temperatures. These changes are subtle, but over generations they can make a real difference. You flex your fingers slowly, imagining how many winters Arctic hunters endured while gripping tools, paddles, and sled harnesses in freezing winds. Another important adaptation lies in metabolism. The human body produces heat by burning energy stored in food. In cold environments, this process becomes especially important. People living in Arctic regions often consume diets rich in fat and protein, which provide dense sources of energy that can be converted into warmth. Fat, in particular, burns slowly and steadily. This steady fuel supply allows the body to maintain a stable internal temperature even when external conditions become extreme. Think about how closely this biological process connects with the traditional foods of the Arctic. Seal oil, whale blubber, fatty fish, caribou meat. These foods are not just culturally significant, they are biologically practical. They support the body's ability to generate warmth in a climate that constantly pulls heat away. But physical adaptation is only part of the story. Behaviour also matters. Arctic communities learn how to regulate activity carefully. Moving too quickly can cause sweating, which becomes dangerous when moisture freezes against the skin. Moving too slowly can allow body temperature to drop too far, so movement becomes measured, steady, balanced. You walk slowly across the frozen landscape, feeling how each step generates warmth through muscle movement. The body becomes a small furnace, quietly burning energy to maintain life. Clothing helps trap that warmth. Shelter protects it. Food replenishes it. But at the centre of the entire system remains the human body itself. Think about how remarkable that is. Our species evolved primarily in warmer regions of the planet. Yet through a combination of cultural knowledge and subtle, biological adjustments, humans learned to inhabit environments far colder than those of our earliest ancestors. The body did not transform into something entirely new. Instead, it stretched its capabilities, adjusted its rhythms, and learned to cooperate with the environment rather than fight against it. You pause and look out across the endless snow. The wind moves softly through the air. Your breath drifts upward in pale clouds. Inside your body, warmth continues to flow quietly through veins and muscles, a small fire carried beneath the skin, a reminder that even in the coldest places on Earth, life still burns gently from within. In a place where storms can arrive without warning, the sky becomes an ancient calendar. Arctic tribes learn to watch the colour of distant clouds, the movement of wind over snow, and the faint glow of the sun beneath the horizon. These signals whisper clues about weather that modern instruments only recently began to understand. You tilt your head upward and watch the sky. At first it seems empty, a pale dome stretching endlessly above the frozen land. But slowly, patterns begin to appear. Thin strands of cloud drift high in the atmosphere, their edges glowing softly in the weak Arctic sunlight. Far to the west, a darker band gathers along the horizon. For people who live in the Arctic, these details matter. Weather in the far north can change quickly. A calm afternoon can transform into a violent blizzard within hours. Winds strong enough to erase tracks and bury camps can arrive suddenly, leaving little time to prepare. So Arctic communities learn to read the sky the way farmers read soil or sailors read the sea. Cloud shapes become clues. Long streaks of cirrus clouds often signal that a weather system is approaching from far away. Low, heavy clouds may indicate incoming snowfall. The colour of the horizon during sunrise and sunset can hint at the moisture content of the air. Even the behaviour of light itself provides information. During the long Arctic twilight, sunlight bends through the atmosphere at shallow angles, creating subtle shifts in colour and brightness that experienced observers can interpret. You imagine standing beside an elder who has watched these skies for decades. They gesture quietly toward the horizon. The wind will change tomorrow. Snow will arrive soon. These predictions are not guesses. They are the result of long observation. Generations of watching. Generations of noticing how certain patterns in the sky tend to precede particular weather events. Modern meteorology now confirms many of these observations. Atmospheric pressure systems, jet stream movements, and ocean temperatures all influence Arctic weather patterns in ways that can indeed be hinted at by cloud formation and wind direction. But long before satellites and weather stations, Arctic peoples were already tracking these signals with remarkable accuracy. Think about how much attention that requires. In modern life, many of us move through the world surrounded by artificial lighting, climate-controlled buildings, and constant digital information. The sky becomes something we glance at briefly before returning indoors. But here, the sky is essential. It holds the earliest warnings of storms. It marks the changing seasons. It guides travel across vast open landscapes. You stand quietly as a faint breeze moves across the snow. Tiny crystals lift into the air, sparkling in the pale sunlight. High above, the clouds slowly thicken. If you listen carefully, the sky itself begins to feel like a conversation, a quiet exchange between atmosphere and land. And those who live here learn to listen patiently. Because in the Arctic, the sky rarely speaks loudly. Its warnings are subtle, its signals quiet. But to those who understand its language, the sky can reveal tomorrow. You move quietly across the frozen land, where every sound travels far through the cold air. Hunting here requires patience beyond imagination. Arctic hunters must approach seals through breathing holes in the ice, sometimes waiting hours in absolute stillness. The stillness becomes part of survival itself. The cold air feels unusually clear. Every sound seems sharper. The crunch of snow beneath your boots echoes farther than you expect, carried across the open tundra by the dense Arctic atmosphere. This is why movement must become careful, quiet, measured. In warmer environments, the sounds of forests or flowing water often mask human footsteps, but the Arctic landscape is often silent, allowing even small disturbances to travel long distances. Animals know this. Seals resting beneath sea ice listen carefully for vibrations above them. Caribou lift their heads at the faintest unfamiliar sound. Arctic foxes pause mid-step when the wind carries strange scents across the snow. To hunt successfully here, humans must learn the art of patience. You kneel beside a small circular opening in the ice. This is a seal's breathing hole, carved through thick sea ice by the animal below. Seals must surface periodically to breathe, and they maintain these holes carefully throughout the winter. Hunters understand this behaviour well. Sometimes they'll wait beside such an opening for hours, completely still, listening, watching. The spear or harpoon remains poised in their hands, ready for the brief moment when the seal rises to inhale air. That moment may last only seconds. Miss it, and the animal disappears beneath the ice, possibly not returning to the same hole again. So patience becomes everything. You imagine the cold pressing gently against your clothing as you wait. Your breath slows, your muscles relax. The wind whispers across the frozen sea. Minutes stretch into long, quiet intervals. But this patience is not empty. During the wait, hunters observe the surrounding environment. They watch the direction of drifting snow. They notice distant animal tracks. They listen for subtle sounds travelling through the ice. Even stillness becomes a form of awareness. Think about how different this experience is from the pace of modern life. Today we often move quickly between tasks, surrounded by constant noise and distraction. But Arctic hunting demands the opposite: stillness, attention, endurance. Eventually, a faint movement disturbs the water below the hole, a small ripple. Then the seal surfaces for air. The moment arrives quickly. The hunter reacts with calm precision, and life continues. Food for the family, materials for clothing, fuel for lamps. In the Arctic, hunting is never just an act of obtaining food. It is a relationship, a careful balance between humans and the animals they depend upon. You stand slowly, looking across the frozen sea. The wind carries faint sounds across the ice. Somewhere far away, another hunter waits beside another breathing hole, listening to the silence, trusting patience, because in this quiet world, survival belongs to those who can wait. At first glance, the Arctic Ocean appears sealed beneath thick ice, but beneath that frozen lid lies a world full of life. Fish move through dark water. Seals rise for breath through small openings. Whales migrate through shifting ice corridors. For Arctic tribes, this hidden ecosystem becomes an essential source of food and knowledge. You stand at the edge of the frozen sea, where the surface stretches outward in pale blue silence. The ice appears solid and endless, a quiet plain merging with the distant horizon. Yet beneath your feet, the ocean is moving. Dark water flows slowly beneath the frozen surface, carrying life through a world hidden from sight. Tiny plankton drift through cold currents. Fish glide through dim green light filtering down from above. Far below, entire ecosystems continue their ancient cycles, unseen by the frozen world overhead. To someone unfamiliar with the Arctic, the sea ice might seem like a barrier, but to the people who live here, it is more like a bridge. You step carefully across the ice, noticing how its surface changes underfoot. Some sections appear smooth and solid. Others are cracked and ridged, where pressure from moving ice sheets has forced large slabs upward into frozen walls. Each formation reveals something about the water below. Hunters learn to recognize these patterns early in life. They understand that sea ice is never truly still. It forms, thickens, cracks and drifts with the slow rhythm of tides and winds. A long crack in the ice might reveal open water where seals gather. A narrow channel between ice flows might mark a migration path used by whales, moving between feeding grounds. Over generations, Arctic communities develop an intimate understanding of these frozen waters. You imagine walking with experienced hunters as they scan the horizon. They are not only watching the surface, they are imagining the unseen world below, where fish gather, where seals travel, where currents carry nutrients upward from deep water. Even the colour of the ice itself can reveal clues. Older ice appears pale and opaque, often thicker and more stable. Younger ice can be darker and slightly translucent, indicating that it formed recently and may not yet support heavy weight. These distinctions can mean the difference between safe travel and dangerous collapse. Think about how remarkable this knowledge becomes over time. Without sonar equipment or underwater cameras, Arctic hunters learn to understand a hidden ocean simply by observing the patterns of ice above it. But the sea offers more than danger and mystery. It offers food. Seals provide meat rich in fat and protein, essential for surviving the cold. Their skins become clothing and shelter material. Their oil fuels lamps that warm homes through long winter nights. Whales, when successfully hunted, provide enormous quantities of food and materials for entire communities. Even fish trapped beneath winter ice remain accessible through carefully cut openings, allowing families to harvest food even during the darkest months of the year. You kneel beside one such opening now. The water below looks almost black in the dim Arctic light, yet movement continues beneath the surface, life flowing quietly through a world hidden from the sky. For Arctic peoples, the frozen sea is never empty. It is a living system, a vast and generous ecosystem concealed beneath a thin layer of ice. And by learning to read the subtle signals written across that ice, generations of hunters discovered that the ocean below was not an obstacle. It was a partner in survival, a hidden source of life beneath the frozen roof of the world. To outsiders, a shelter made of snow seems fragile. But when you step inside an igloo, the wind disappears almost instantly. Snow, surprisingly, traps heat extremely well. Carefully shaped blocks create a structure strong enough to resist blizzards. In this way, one of the coldest materials in nature becomes a surprisingly comfortable home. You run your gloved hand across the wall of a snow block freshly cut from the ground. It feels firm and compact, not the loose powder many people imagine when they think of snow. This difference matters. Not all snow can become a shelter. Certain types of wind-packed snow form dense layers strong enough to be carved into blocks that hold their shape. Arctic builders learn to recognize these conditions immediately, selecting areas where the snow is compressed into stable forms. With a snow knife, a tool often carved from bone or metal, blocks are cut carefully from the ground. Each block is shaped into a gentle curve. One by one, they are stacked into a spiral that slowly rises upward, forming a dome. From a distance, the structure appears simple, but its design reflects a deep understanding of physics and geometry. The dome shape distributes weight evenly, allowing the entire structure to support itself without collapsing. Wind flowing around the curved surface is deflected rather than caught by flat walls, making the shelter surprisingly resistant to powerful Arctic storms. You imagine stepping inside such a structure now. The entrance tunnel slopes downward slightly, forcing cold air to settle near the floor, while warmer air rises toward the sleeping platform. Inside, the space feels quiet, still. Even though the outside air might be far below freezing, the interior temperature of a well-built snow shelter can rise significantly from body heat and the warmth of small lamps. Snow works as an excellent insulator because it traps air between its crystals. These tiny pockets slow the movement of heat, preventing warmth from escaping too quickly. In a strange way, snow becomes the perfect building material for a frozen world. It is everywhere, it can be shaped easily, and when used correctly it provides shelter from wind and cold that would otherwise be deadly. You look upward at the ceiling of the dome. Soft light filters through the snow blocks, casting a faint blue glow across the interior. The world outside feels distant, as if the shelter itself has created a small pocket of calm in the endless Arctic night. Think about the ingenuity behind this design. Modern homes rely on lumber, bricks, insulation panels, and complex heating systems. Yet Arctic communities discovered that one of the coldest materials on Earth could become a comfortable home simply by understanding its structure. There is also elegance in its impermanence. Snow shelters can be built quickly, sometimes in less than an hour by experienced builders. When a group moves to a new hunting ground, the old shelter simply melts away with the changing seasons, leaving the land unchanged. This temporary architecture reflects the rhythm of Arctic life. Nothing is meant to last forever. Shelters rise when needed, they disappear when the journey continues. You sit quietly inside the snow dome for a moment, listening to the soft hush of wind moving across the outside walls. The storm may rage across the tundra, but here, inside this carefully shaped structure of frozen crystals, warmth gathers gently. A quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful forms of protection are built from the simplest materials. Then comes the season when the sun simply stops rising. Weeks stretch into months of twilight and darkness. Yet human communities continue their routines. Stories are told, tools are repaired, Knowledge is passed quietly between generations. The long night becomes less a threat, and more a time for memory. You look toward the horizon where the sun once travelled each day. Now it no longer appears. During the Arctic winter, the tilt of Earth's axis carries the northern regions into a period of prolonged darkness known as the polar night. For weeks, and sometimes months depending on latitude, the sun remains below the horizon. At first, the absence of sunlight feels unsettling. The sky never brightens fully. Instead, the world rests in a soft twilight during midday before sinking once again into deep blue darkness. But human communities do not stop living. Inside shelters warmed by lamps and shared body heat, daily life continues. Food is prepared, clothing is repaired. Children listen as elders recount stories passed down through countless winters before. These stories carry more than entertainment. They hold knowledge, lessons about hunting, travel, weather, and the animals that sustain life in the Arctic. Oral traditions become libraries of survival. Through stories, people remember which rivers freeze safely first. They remember dangerous regions of unstable sea ice. They remember the migration patterns of animals that may not return for many seasons. The long night becomes a classroom, a time when experience is shared slowly and patiently. Outside, the darkness is not entirely empty. The moon reflects off the snow, sometimes creating landscapes almost bright enough to travel safely. The stars shine with unusual clarity in the dry Arctic air. And occasionally the sky reveals something extraordinary. The aurora borealis, green and violet ribbons of light ripple across the heavens like silent waves. For many Arctic cultures, these lights carry spiritual meaning, appearing as messages from unseen worlds or reminders of ancestral presence. You step outside the shelter and watch the sky. The lights move slowly, drifting across the stars in graceful arcs. The snow reflects their glow, turning the landscape into a quiet ocean of pale green light. Even in darkness, beauty remains. Think about the psychological challenge of living through such long winters. Without careful cultural practices, isolation and darkness could easily become overwhelming. But Arctic communities developed ways to maintain balance. Shared meals, storytelling, music and laughter within the warmth of family spaces. These traditions help maintain emotional resilience through months when the sun remains hidden. Gradually, the darkness becomes familiar, not frightening, simply another season, another chapter in the slow rhythm of Arctic life, and eventually, after many weeks of night, the horizon begins to glow once again. Eventually the sun returns, slowly at first, barely lifting above the horizon. Then longer days arrive, and with them a burst of activity across the Arctic landscape. Animals migrate, birds fill the sky, and communities prepare for the brief but vital season of abundance. One morning you notice a faint golden line stretching along the horizon. The sun is returning. After months of darkness, its first appearance feels almost ceremonial. The light is soft and distant at first, barely rising above the edge of the earth before sinking again. But each day it climbs slightly higher. The Arctic landscape begins to change. Snow reflects the growing sunlight, filling the world with pale brilliance. Shadows grow sharper. The sky deepens into shades of blue that seemed forgotten during the long winter night. With the return of sunlight comes movement. Birds arrive from distant continents, filling the air with calls and wings. Rivers begin to loosen beneath their frozen surfaces. Caribou herds begin their migrations across the tundra. For Arctic communities, this season is crucial. The summer window is short, sometimes lasting only a few months before cold returns again. During this time, people gather resources that must sustain them through the coming winter. Fishing increases, hunting intensifies. Plants that briefly emerge from thawing soil are collected and preserved. You imagine the landscape now buzzing with quiet activity. Sleds move across the land. Boats carved from wood and skin travel along newly opened water channels. Families work together, storing food and repairing tools for the seasons ahead. The endless daylight of Arctic summer can feel almost surreal. In some regions, the sun never fully sets for weeks. It circles the sky in slow arcs, casting a constant golden glow across the tundra. Sleep becomes flexible. Work continues whenever energy allows. The entire ecosystem moves quickly, racing to complete a year's worth of growth before winter returns. Think about how extraordinary this rhythm is. Months of darkness, then months of continuous light. Human cultures living here must adapt not only to cold, but also to dramatic shifts in daylight that reshape daily life itself. But Arctic communities have learned these rhythms well. Their calendars follow the migrations of animals and the cycles of sea ice. Their traditions align with the turning of seasons that repeat with quiet reliability. You stand beneath the midnight sun and look across the wide Arctic horizon. The land feels alive again, and for a brief moment each year, warmth and light return to the frozen world. In winter, the ocean transforms into a highway of ice. Arctic hunters travel vast distances across frozen water, guided by landmarks of pressure ridges and drifting snow. Sleds pulled by dogs allow journeys that would otherwise be impossible across such immense distances. You stand beside a sled resting on the frozen surface of the sea. Its wooden runners are smooth from years of travel polished by snow and ice. Nearby, a group of dogs waits patiently, their thick fur rippling slightly in the cold wind. These animals are more than companions. They are partners in survival. Dog sledding becomes one of the most important transportation systems ever developed for Arctic environments. Dogs possess natural adaptations that allow them to run long distances in extreme cold while pulling heavy loads. Their endurance makes it possible for human communities to travel across landscapes that would otherwise be nearly impassable. You imagine the sled beginning to move. The dogs lean forward together, their harnesses tightening as the sled glides smoothly across the frozen surface. The sound is soft, just the whisper of runners sliding across packed snow. Across the Arctic, winter sea ice forms vast flat corridors connecting distant coastlines and islands. What appears as a frozen ocean becomes a temporary road network stretching for hundreds of miles. But travel here still requires skill. Pressure ridges form where ice sheets collide, creating jagged walls that must be carefully navigated. Thin ice may hide beneath snow, posing serious danger if travellers do not recognise the warning signs. Experienced guides memorise safe routes across these frozen seas. They learn which ridges remain stable and which areas shift unpredictably with tides. Landmarks become subtle. A particular ridge shaped like a broken tooth. A dark line of exposed ice along the horizon. Even the direction of wind-carved snow patterns helps maintain orientation during long journeys. You ride quietly across the ice as the sled moves forward. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. Above you, the sky remains vast and pale. Think about how much courage these journeys required. Travellers crossed enormous distances through landscapes where storms could erase tracks within minutes and where temperatures could fall to levels capable of freezing exposed skin in moments. Yet these routes allowed trade, communication, and cooperation between communities separated by hundreds of miles. The frozen sea became a bridge, a connection between distant cultures sharing knowledge and resources across the Arctic world. And as the sled continues gliding across the ice, you realize something quietly remarkable. In a place that seems empty and inhospitable, human ingenuity created pathways where none appeared to exist. Bone, stone, ivory and driftwood become the building blocks of survival. Tools are crafted with extraordinary precision. Harpoons are designed to hold fast inside moving animals. Snow knives slice blocks of ice with surprising ease. Every object reflects generations of careful experimentation. You pick up a small tool resting on the snow. At first it seems simple, a carved piece of bone shaped carefully by hand. But when you look closer, its design reveals something extraordinary. The edges are smooth from careful polishing. The curves fit naturally within the hand. Every detail appears deliberate, refined through generations of practical experience. In the Arctic, tools must be both efficient and reliable. Resources are limited. Mistakes can be costly. So each object becomes the result of countless small improvements made over time. Consider the harpoon. At first glance, it resembles a spear, but its design is far more sophisticated. Many Arctic harpoons include detachable heads connected to lines made from braided sinew. When the harpoon strikes an animal, the head separates from the shaft, remaining embedded while the line allows the hunter to maintain control. This prevents prey from escaping and allows hunters to retrieve valuable resources safely. Even the materials used in these tools demonstrate remarkable ingenuity. Whalebone provides strength. Caribou antler offers flexibility. ivory from walrus tusks can be shaped into precise components resistant to cracking in extreme cold. Driftwood, carried from distant forests by ocean currents, becomes essential for constructing sled runners, spear shafts, and boat frames. Nothing is wasted. Every material is carefully selected for its specific properties. You imagine a small workshop inside a winter shelter. A hunter sharpens a blade made from stone. Another carefully drills holes into bone using a hand-powered tool. Nearby, someone threads sinew through a small needle, preparing to repair clothing damaged during a recent journey. These activities may appear ordinary, but together they represent a technological system perfectly adapted to one of the harshest environments on Earth. Modern engineering often relies on machines and industrial processes. Arctic technologies rely on patience, observation, experimentation across generations. Every improvement matters. A slightly sharper blade makes building shelters easier. A stronger line prevents the loss of valuable food during a hunt. A more flexible sled runner allows longer journeys across uneven ice. You hold the small bone tool again and imagine the countless hands that may have shaped similar objects across thousands of years. Human ingenuity does not always appear as towering machines or complex factories. Sometimes it appears as a perfectly balanced tool carved quietly beside a small fire, and in the Arctic, these simple tools carried an extraordinary responsibility. They allowed entire cultures to survive in a landscape of ice, wind, and endless cold. A quiet reminder that intelligence is not measured by complexity alone, but by how well something works, especially in the coldest places on Earth. Surviving in extreme cold requires immense energy. Traditional Arctic diets are rich in fat and protein from marine animals, fish, and caribou. These foods provide the calories necessary to fuel a body constantly fighting the cold. In many ways, Arctic cuisine becomes a carefully balanced system of biological survival. You sit beside a small lamp fueled by seal oil, its flames steady and quiet. The air inside the shelter carries the faint scent of cooked meat, rich and comforting after hours spent outside in the wind. Food in the Arctic is never casual. It is warmth, it is strength, it is survival. In warmer regions of the world, people often eat grains, fruits, and vegetables grown in fertile soil. But here, the frozen ground offers very little agriculture. The growing season is short, and much of the land remains locked beneath permafrost. So Arctic communities turn to the animals that thrive in this environment. Seal meat, whale blubber, fatty fish, and caribou become the foundation of daily nutrition. These foods may seem unusual to outsiders, but biologically they are perfectly suited to the needs of the human body in extreme cold. Fat is especially important. Each gram of fat contains more than twice the energy of carbohydrates or protein. When consumed, that energy becomes fuel for the body's internal furnace, helping maintain a stable core temperature even when the air outside is dangerously cold. You take a slow breath, imagining the warmth spreading through your body after a meal rich in these dense nutrients. The body responds quickly. Blood carries energy to muscles. Heat radiates outward beneath layers of fur clothing. Strength returns to tired limbs after long hours of travel. In this way, food becomes more than nourishment. It becomes protection. Traditional Arctic diets also contain high levels of omega-3 fatty acids from marine animals and fish. These nutrients support heart health and circulation, both of which become especially important in cold environments, where blood flow must constantly adapt to preserve body heat. Even the way food is prepared reflects careful adaptation. Meat may be eaten raw, dried, fermented, or frozen depending on the season. Freezing temperatures allow natural preservation, preventing spoilage without the need for salt or smoke. In winter, food can be stored directly in the frozen ground, creating natural freezers that remain stable for months. You imagine families working together to process a successful hunt. Large pieces of meat are cut carefully with sharp tools. Fat is rendered into oil for lamps and cooking. Skins are cleaned and prepared for clothing or shelter. Nothing is wasted. Every part of the animal carries value. Even bones become tools. This efficiency reflects an understanding that survival in the Arctic depends on respect for the animals that provide life. Think about how closely human biology and cultural knowledge must align in such an environment. The food available shapes the body's metabolism. The body's needs shape hunting strategies. Hunting strategies shape community cooperation. Everything connects. When you step back and view the system as a whole, it becomes clear that Arctic cuisine is not random or primitive. It is sophisticated, a nutritional strategy refined through centuries of careful observation, and as the warm meal settles inside you, the cold outside feels just a little less powerful. A quiet reminder that in the Arctic, the right food can become a source of warmth carried deep within the body itself. No one survives alone in the Arctic. Sharing food, tools, and shelter becomes a cultural necessity. Cooperation is not just kindness, it is survival mathematics. A successful hunt feeds many families, ensuring that the entire community can endure the winter together. You stand in the centre of a small winter camp. Around you, several shelters rise gently from the snow, their curved forms blending almost seamlessly with the frozen landscape. Thin threads of smoke drift upward from small openings, dissolving quietly into the pale sky. Inside these shelters live families whose survival depends not only on individual skill, but on cooperation. In environments where resources can fluctuate dramatically, sharing becomes essential. A single hunter might successfully capture a seal large enough to feed several families. Another might spend days without success. If each person kept their catch only for themselves, the risks would become enormous. But Arctic cultures developed a different approach. Food is shared. Tools are lent, labour is divided. You imagine the moment a successful hunter returns from the ice. Word spreads quickly through the camp. Families gather as the animal is carefully divided. Portions are distributed among elders, children, and households, according to long-established traditions. These traditions are not random acts of generosity. They are systems designed to maintain stability. If one family experiences difficulty during a harsh season, others help sustain them. Later, when fortunes shift, the roles may reverse. Over time, this exchange creates a web of mutual support. Think about how important trust becomes in such communities. When you rely on others for survival, relationships must remain strong. Conflicts are resolved carefully. Cooperation is encouraged through shared rituals, storytelling, and collective decision-making. Even hunting itself often becomes a group effort. Teams of hunters coordinate their movements across sea ice or tundra. One person may locate animals while others assist with the capture or transport of food. Children grow up watching these interactions, learning that survival is not just about personal strength, it is about belonging. You step inside one of the shelters. The interior feels warm compared to the cold outside. Several people sit together repairing clothing while others prepare food. Quiet conversation fills the air. Laughter appears occasionally. These moments of connection help maintain emotional resilience during long winters. In many ways, Arctic communities function like living organisms. Each member plays a role. Each skill contributes to the survival of the whole. Some individuals excel at hunting, others craft tools or sew clothing. Elders carry knowledge about weather patterns and travel routes learned across decades of experience. Together, these skills create balance. Think about how different this approach is from modern societies that often emphasize individual success above collective well-being. In the Arctic, individual survival is rarely possible. Only cooperation allows communities to endure the extreme challenges of the environment. And so generosity becomes practical. Kindness becomes strategic. You step back outside and look across the quiet camp once more. The wind moves gently across the snow. Inside each shelter, families continue their routines. Not as isolated individuals, but as parts of a carefully woven network of shared survival. Without written language for much of their history, Arctic tribes store vast libraries of knowledge in stories and oral traditions. These narratives carry maps, weather patterns, hunting strategies, and survival wisdom across generations. You sit quietly beside a small circle of people, gathered inside a warm shelter. Outside, the wind brushes softly across the snow. Inside, an elder begins to speak. The story may sound simple at first. It might describe a hunting journey, a difficult winter, or a distant valley where caribou once gathered in great numbers. But beneath the surface of the story lies something much deeper: information. Before written records existed, human societies relied on memory to preserve knowledge. In the Arctic, where mistakes could mean life or death, this knowledge needed to be accurate and detailed. Stories became the vessels that carried it. Through narrative, elders could teach younger generations where dangerous sea ice tends to form. They could describe the timing of seasonal migrations or the location of sheltered valleys that protect travellers during storms. You imagine listening carefully as each detail unfolds. The story might mention a particular ridge shaped like a sleeping animal, or a river that freezes later than others, or the behaviour of birds that signals the approach of changing weather. To an outsider, these details might seem poetic, but to those who understand the landscape, they function as instructions. Oral traditions also help maintain cultural continuity. They remind people of their ancestors' experiences, their triumphs and hardships, their lessons learned through years of survival. In this way, memory becomes a form of technology, not mechanical, not written, but powerful. Each generation receives knowledge from those who came before, then adds its own observations before passing the stories forward again. Think about how many winters might be contained within a single story. Decades of weather patterns, hundreds of hunting journeys, thousands of small observations carefully remembered and shared. Without these narratives, survival in the Arctic would become far more uncertain. You look around the shelter as the story continues. Children listen quietly. Adults nod in recognition at certain moments. The knowledge being shared has likely been told many times before, yet it remains important each time, because memory must remain active. If knowledge is not repeated, it fades, and in a place where information about the land can mean survival, forgetting becomes dangerous. So stories continue, night after night, winter after winter. And through these quiet conversations, the Arctic landscape becomes mapped not only across the snow outside, but within the minds of the people who call it home. Living in such an extreme environment requires emotional resilience. Patience becomes a survival skill, so does calm thinking during storms and scarcity. Over time, Arctic cultures develop philosophies that emphasize balance with nature rather than domination over it. You step outside into the quiet Arctic wind. The cold presses gently against your clothing, not violently but persistently, reminding you that survival here requires patience. Extreme environments challenge not only the body, but also the mind. Long winters bring darkness that can stretch for months. Storms may isolate communities for days at a time. Food supplies sometimes fluctuate unpredictably depending on animal migrations. To endure these conditions, Arctic cultures develop psychological strategies just as important as their physical technologies. Patience becomes one of the most valuable traits. Impulsive decisions can lead to dangerous situations. Travelling too quickly across unfamiliar ice, attempting hunts in poor weather, ignoring subtle warning signs in the sky. Instead, successful hunters and travellers cultivate calm observation. They wait, they watch, they move only when conditions feel right. This mindset extends beyond hunting, it shapes everyday life. When storms arrive, families remain inside shelters, conserving energy while waiting for clearer weather. During difficult seasons when animals are scarce, communities share resources and trust that abundance will eventually return. Hope remains steady but realistic. You imagine sitting beside a group of elders, discussing the challenges of past winters. Their tone is calm, not dramatic. Difficult experiences are remembered not with fear, but with quiet acceptance. This emotional stability helps communities maintain resilience through uncertainty. Many Arctic belief systems also emphasize respect for the natural world. Animals are treated with gratitude after hunts. Landscapes are regarded as living systems rather than objects to be controlled. Such perspectives encourage humility. Humans are participants in the Arctic ecosystem, not masters of it. Think about how powerful this philosophy becomes over time. Instead of fighting the environment, Arctic cultures seek balance with it. They observe, they adapt, they learn. And in doing so, they discover a form of harmony that allows human life to continue in places that might otherwise seem impossible to inhabit. The wind moves gently across the snow again. You breathe slowly, feeling the cold air enter your lungs. It no longer feels hostile, just present. Another part of the world's quiet rhythm. Even the most experienced communities sometimes face unexpected shifts. Sea ice can break without warning. Storms can erase familiar landscapes overnight. Survival depends on constant observation and a deep respect for the unpredictable nature of the Arctic. You walk carefully across the frozen sea, noticing how the ice beneath your feet occasionally produces faint cracking sounds. This is normal. Sea ice is never completely still. It expands and contracts with temperature changes, shifts slowly with ocean currents, and fractures under pressure when large sheets collide. Most of the time, these movements remain subtle, but sometimes they become dramatic. A storm may drive powerful winds across the Arctic Ocean, forcing massive ice flows against each other. Walls of ice several meters high may rise suddenly where flat surfaces once existed. Elsewhere, cracks open quickly, revealing dark water beneath the snow. Travellers who fail to notice these changes can find themselves stranded on drifting ice or trapped between newly formed ridges. So observation becomes constant. You imagine experienced hunters scanning the surface ahead. They look for slight colour changes in the snow, small depressions where cracks may be forming beneath the surface, unusual patterns of drifting snow that reveal subtle movement of the ice below. Even the sounds of the ice matter. Low groaning vibrations may signal pressure building beneath large sheets. Sharp, snapping sounds might indicate new fractures forming nearby. These auditory clues become part of a complex sensory system guiding safe travel. Think about how alert a person must remain in such environments. Modern travellers often rely on maps, GPS devices, and weather forecasts, but Arctic hunters learn to read the environment directly. Their safety depends on awareness. Every step becomes an act of listening to the ice, listening to the wind, listening to the quiet signals that reveal how the frozen landscape is changing. And when danger appears, decisions must be made quickly. Routes change, journeys pause, shelters are built while storms pass overhead. The Arctic does not offer guarantees, but those who respect its unpredictable nature can often anticipate its shifts, not perfectly, but well enough to survive. You pause again and look across the frozen sea. The surface appears calm, yet beneath it, enormous forces continue their slow movements, a reminder that even the most solid ground in the Arctic is never entirely still. Despite the isolation of the Arctic, tribes maintain trade networks that stretch across enormous distances. Stone tools, ivory carvings, and rare materials travel between communities through slow but steady exchange routes across ice and tundra. You stand at a meeting place where two groups have arrived from distant regions. Their sleds rest nearby, loaded with bundles carefully wrapped in animal skins. These journeys may have taken weeks, but the purpose of the gathering is clear: trade. Even in the far north, human communities rarely lived in complete isolation. Networks of exchange allowed materials and ideas to travel across vast distances. One group might carry stones suitable for crafting sharp blades. Another might bring carved ivory tools from coastal regions rich with walrus populations. Some communities offer finely prepared furs or specialized hunting equipment, refined through generations of experimentation. These exchanges strengthen relationships between distant groups. Information travels alongside physical goods, news about weather patterns, stories about unusual animal migrations, warnings about dangerous ice conditions. Trade becomes a form of communication connecting communities across the Arctic. You imagine the quiet conversations taking place between travellers. Languages may differ slightly between regions, but shared survival experiences create understanding. Gestures, demonstrations, shared meals, these interactions build trust. Over time, established trade routes emerge, paths across tundra valleys, ice corridors linking distant coastlines, seasonal meeting points where groups know they will encounter one another again. Think about how remarkable these networks are. Across landscapes where travel is slow and conditions often harsh, human societies still find ways to connect. Knowledge spreads, technologies improve, cultures exchange ideas that strengthen survival strategies for everyone involved. You watch as goods are carefully examined and exchanged. There is no rush. Every object carries value. Every relationship matters. And as the sleds are eventually loaded once more for the return journeys, something else travels quietly across the Arctic landscape. Connection. A reminder that even in one of the most remote environments on Earth, human communities remain linked through cooperation, curiosity, and the quiet desire to share what they have learned. Above the frozen land, shimmering curtains of green and violet light ripple across the sky. Many Arctic cultures interpret the northern lights as spiritual presences or messages from unseen worlds. These beliefs reflect a deep relationship between humans and the vast forces of nature surrounding them. You step outside into the deep Arctic night, where the air feels still and almost crystalline in its clarity. Above you, the stars appear unusually sharp, scattered across the sky like distant sparks. In the far north, the atmosphere is often dry and free of the haze that softens the night sky elsewhere on Earth. Every constellation seems brighter here, closer somehow, as if the sky has lowered itself toward the frozen ground. And then, slowly, something begins to move. A faint green arc appears near the horizon. At first, it is subtle, like a soft breath of light stretching across the sky. But gradually it grows brighter, lifting upward in long, shimmering waves that ripple silently above the tundra. This is the aurora borealis, the northern lights. Modern science explains their origin in the interaction between charged particles from the sun and Earth's magnetic field. These energetic particles travel enormous distances through space before colliding with atoms high in the atmosphere, releasing bursts of light in shades of green, pink, and violet. But for thousands of years, long before this explanation existed, people living beneath these skies developed their own interpretations. Imagine witnessing such a phenomenon without knowing its scientific cause. The lights appear suddenly, they move unpredictably. Sometimes they swirl rapidly like celestial rivers. Other times they hover quietly across the horizon for hours, glowing softly against the darkness. It is easy to understand why many Arctic cultures came to see the aurora as something alive. In some traditions, the lights were believed to be spirits dancing across the sky. In others, they were seen as the souls of ancestors watching over the living. Some stories warned children to behave respectfully when the lights appeared, suggesting that the sky itself was observing the world below. These beliefs did not arise from ignorance. They arose from intimacy with the environment. When you spend your life beneath an enormous sky filled with mysterious movements of light and weather, it becomes natural to see those forces as meaningful. You stand quietly as the aurora grows brighter. Long curtains of colour ripple slowly across the heavens, reflecting faintly off the snow-covered ground. The entire landscape seems to glow with a pale, shifting light. Even today, scientists who study the aurora often describe a sense of awe when witnessing particularly powerful displays. Because despite our understanding of the physics involved, the experience itself remains deeply emotional. Think about how these lights might feel to a community living through the long Arctic winter. Months of darkness surround them, the sun remains hidden, and then suddenly, the sky comes alive with colour and motion. It is easy to imagine how such moments could inspire stories that connect the heavens with the human world. Stories that remind people they are part of something vast and mysterious. You breathe slowly as the lights drift across the sky. Eventually they begin to fade, dissolving once more into the quiet darkness of the Arctic night. But their memory lingers, a gentle reminder that the frozen landscapes of the north are never truly empty. Even in the deepest silence, the sky itself sometimes chooses to dance. Through centuries of extreme cold, Arctic societies continue adapting with remarkable creativity. Their technologies evolve slowly but effectively, shaped by intimate knowledge of animals, ice, and climate. You walk along a stretch of tundra where generations of travellers have passed before you. There are no roads here, no permanent markers, yet the land holds invisible pathways shaped by centuries of experience. Arctic cultures are often described as resilient, but that word only begins to capture the depth of what occurred here over thousands of years. Because resilience in the Arctic does not mean simply enduring hardship, it means learning continuously. Every winter teaches something new, every hunt reveals small details about animal behaviour, every storm leaves behind lessons about wind patterns, shelter design, or travel routes. Over time, this accumulation of knowledge becomes extraordinary. Technologies evolve slowly but steadily. Clothing grows more efficient. Tools become sharper and more specialised. Travel methods adapt to changing ice conditions. None of these innovations appear suddenly. They emerge through quiet experimentation across generations. Imagine a hunter noticing that a slightly different harpoon design holds more securely when striking a seal. The idea spreads. Others adopt it. Over decades, the improved design becomes standard. Or imagine a traveller discovering a safer route between two coastal regions, protected from shifting sea ice by natural barriers of land. That knowledge becomes part of community memory, guiding future journeys. This process continues endlessly. Arctic cultures are not static. They adapt constantly, responding to subtle environmental changes that outsiders might barely notice. You look across the landscape again. The tundra may appear empty, but beneath its surface lies a long record of human ingenuity. Temporary camps built and abandoned, trade routes travelled countless times, tools refined through careful craftsmanship. These cultures also demonstrate resilience through their social systems. Cooperation remains central. Elders pass knowledge to younger generations. Families support one another during difficult seasons. Community decisions reflect the shared understanding that survival depends on balance rather than competition. Think about how impressive this achievement becomes when viewed across the full span of history. Thousands of years spent living in one of the harshest climates on Earth, not as occasional visitors, but as thriving cultures with languages, traditions, and complex social structures. Modern technology sometimes creates the illusion that human survival depends primarily on machines. But Arctic history tells a different story: observation, patience, cooperation. These qualities allowed entire societies to flourish where survival once seemed impossible. You pause for a moment, listening to the wind move softly through the grasses beneath the snow. The land remembers, and so do the people who continue living here today. Eventually, explorers from distant continents begin reaching the Arctic. Many arrive with advanced tools yet struggle to survive the cold. Meanwhile, the knowledge held by local tribes proves far more effective than most outsiders expect. You imagine the moment when unfamiliar ships first appear along the distant Arctic horizon. Their wooden hulls push slowly through fields of drifting ice. Tall masts carry sails, stiffened by the cold wind. The crews aboard these vessels come from distant continents, drawn northward by curiosity, trade ambitions, and the hope of discovering new sea routes. To these explorers, the Arctic seems mysterious and forbidding. Maps are incomplete. Weather patterns are poorly understood. The cold itself feels overwhelming to people accustomed to milder climates. Many arrive carrying equipment that appears advanced for its time: metal tools, navigation instruments, heavy wool clothing. But despite these technologies, survival often proves difficult. Some expeditions underestimate the severity of Arctic winters. Others become trapped when sea ice closes around their ships. Food supplies run low. Frostbite and illness spread quickly through crews unprepared for such conditions. And during these moments of struggle, something important becomes clear. The people who have lived in the Arctic for generations already possess knowledge far more valuable than imported equipment. Indigenous communities understand the rhythm of sea ice. They know when storms are likely to arrive. They recognize safe travel routes across tundra and frozen ocean. They know how to build shelters quickly using materials found in the environment. Many explorers eventually learn to rely on this expertise. They adopt clothing designs modelled after traditional fur garments. They learn to travel by sled, with dogs rather than relying only on ships or heavy wagons. Some even depend on local guides to navigate unfamiliar terrain. Without this knowledge, many expeditions would likely have failed entirely. You stand quietly as the imagined scene unfolds. Two very different ways of understanding the Arctic meet for the first time, one based on exploration and external technology, the other rooted in centuries of lived experience. Gradually a form of exchange begins. Explorers share certain tools or trade goods. Arctic communities share survival knowledge refined through generations. Sometimes these encounters remain peaceful. Other times they bring conflict and misunderstanding. History, like the Arctic itself, rarely moves in simple patterns. But one truth becomes clear through many of these encounters. The Arctic is not a place easily conquered. It must be understood. And the people who had lived here long before outsiders arrived carried that understanding within their traditions, their stories, and their daily lives. You look out across the frozen coastline once more. The sea ice drifts quietly beneath the pale sky. Long before the arrival of foreign ships, human knowledge had already learned how to live here. When you step back and look across thousands of years, the story of Arctic survival reveals something quietly profound. Human beings did not conquer the Arctic. Instead, they learned to belong within it. Through patience, observation, and cooperation, ancient tribes discovered that even the coldest corners of Earth could become home. You stand once more on the wide Arctic horizon. The wind moves gently across the snow, carrying faint whispers of distant ice shifting somewhere far out on the frozen sea. For a moment you imagine the countless generations who have stood in places like this before. Hunters watching the sky for changing weather. Families travelling across tundra valleys following migrating animals. Elders sharing stories beside the warm glow of seal oil lamps during the long winter night. Across thousands of years, these small moments formed an entire civilization of knowledge, not written in books, not stored in machines, but carried carefully through memory, practice, and community. The Arctic often appears to outsiders as a place of extremes: bitter cold, long darkness, dangerous storms, and all of that is true. But those who lived here understood something deeper. The environment was not an enemy. It was a system, a set of rhythms and relationships connecting animals, ice, weather, and human life. By learning those rhythms, Arctic cultures found ways to thrive where survival once seemed unlikely. Clothing crafted from animal skins trapped warmth against the body. Shelters built from snow turned the cold itself into protection. Food rich in fat fueled the body's internal heat. Communities worked together so that no one faced the harshest seasons alone. Even the sky, the snow, and the movement of sea ice became sources of information guiding daily decisions. Think about how powerful that perspective becomes when viewed from the present day. Modern technology allows us to travel quickly across the planet, shielded from many environmental challenges by machines and infrastructure. Yet the deeper lessons of Arctic survival remain surprisingly relevant. Observation, patience, respect for the natural world, cooperation within communities. These qualities helped ancient societies endure one of the most demanding environments on Earth. And in many ways, they remain valuable today. You take one last look across the frozen landscape. The sun rests low above the horizon, casting long, golden light across the snow. Somewhere in the distance, a sled moves slowly across the ice, following paths that have existed for generations. The Arctic continues its quiet rhythms, and the wisdom shaped by thousands of winters still travels across this land, carried forward by those who remember how to listen. Imagine the first winter a human community ever attempted to endure this far north. The sun lowers day by day until the sky becomes a dim blue twilight that barely lifts above the horizon. The cold grows deeper with every passing night, snow thickens across the land, and yet somewhere in this frozen silence, a small group of people gathers around a fragile flame, discovering for the very first time that human life can continue even here. You stand with them at the edge of the tundra as the season slowly changes. At first the cold arrives gently, carried on longer winds that sweep across the open plains. The rivers begin to freeze along their edges. Frost forms delicate patterns on animal hides, and tools left outside overnight. But the real transformation happens slowly. The sun begins to sink lower each day, travelling shorter arcs across the southern horizon before disappearing once more. Shadows stretch longer across the snow. The air grows drier, sharper. This is the first true Arctic winter these people have ever faced. They do not yet know every pattern of the land. They do not yet know how long the darkness will last, but they are learning. You imagine the careful work taking place inside their camp. Shelters are reinforced with thicker layers of hide. Snow is packed along the outer walls to block the wind. Food gathered during the warmer months is carefully rationed. Every decision matters, because the cold now reaches levels that challenge the limits of the human body. Temperatures drop far below freezing. Breath freezes instantly in the air. Exposed skin becomes numb within moments. Yet the small community continues its quiet routine. A hunter returns with meat from a successful expedition across the tundra. The animal is carefully divided among the group, its fat rendered into oil, its bones prepared for tools, its hide preserved for clothing. Children sit close to the warmth of a small fire while elders quietly discuss the weather patterns they observe. Even now, knowledge is forming. They begin noticing how certain valleys block the strongest winds. They learn that snow itself can be shaped into protective walls. They learn that animals follow predictable routes even during winter storms. Each observation becomes a thread in a growing fabric of survival. Think about how extraordinary this moment is in human history. For most of our species' early existence, people lived in warmer climates where food remained relatively abundant year-round. But here, in the Arctic, winter forces a different kind of thinking. Planning must extend months into the future. Energy must be conserved. Communities must cooperate more closely than ever before. And yet, something remarkable begins to happen. The cold that once seemed like an impossible barrier slowly becomes something understandable. Not easy, not gentle, but predictable. Patterns appear within the chaos of storms and freezing winds. The sun may vanish for long stretches, but it will return. Animals may migrate away for a season, but they will follow familiar routes again. Winter becomes less mysterious, less terrifying. It becomes a season. You stand beside the group as the long night deepens. The fire flickers quietly, reflecting in the calm eyes of people who are slowly realizing something important. They have survived the beginning of the Arctic winter, and if they can endure this first one, then perhaps humans can live here after all. Over time, the Arctic itself begins to feel less like an enemy and more like a patient instructor. Every storm teaches a lesson. Every shifting ice floe reveals something about the hidden ocean beneath. Slowly, through careful observation, the frozen landscape transforms from a threat into a guide. Those who survive longest are not the strongest, but the ones who listen most carefully to what the ice is quietly saying. You step carefully across a wide field of sea ice, feeling the subtle firmness beneath your boots. At first glance, the surface appears still, but the Arctic ice is never truly motionless. Beneath the frozen crust, the ocean continues its quiet movements. Tides rise and fall. Currents flow slowly beneath enormous sheets of ice. Wind pushes floating ice fields against one another with immense force, and every one of these movements leaves a trace, a crack across the surface, a ridge where two ice sheets collide, a smooth patch where wind has polished the snow into hard glassy layers. Over generations, Arctic travellers begin to recognise these patterns. A fresh crack in the ice might signal new tidal pressure beneath the surface. A particular ridge formation might indicate that an area has remained stable for weeks, making it safer for travel. The ice becomes a language. You imagine walking beside an experienced hunter as they scan the frozen landscape. Their eyes move constantly, not searching randomly, but reading. They notice the faint colour difference between thick ice and recently frozen water. They listen for subtle sounds carried through the surface, low groaning vibrations that reveal distant movement. Sometimes the ice speaks softly, sometimes it speaks loudly. A sudden thunder-like crack might echo across the sea as pressure forces two massive plates apart. To an untrained traveller, such sounds might create panic. But to those who understand the ice, they simply offer information. The Arctic teaches patience through these lessons. Mistakes can be dangerous, but they also become powerful teachers. A traveller who once stepped onto thin ice learns to recognise its visual texture forever afterward. A hunter caught in a sudden storm learns how wind direction shapes drifting snow. Knowledge grows slowly, layer upon layer, much like the ice itself. Think about how different this relationship is from the modern idea of dominating nature. In the Arctic, the environment cannot be controlled. It is too vast, too powerful. Instead, survival depends on learning its behaviour. You walk across the ice again, pausing to kneel beside a narrow fracture stretching across the frozen surface. Dark water glimmers faintly beneath. This opening may widen tomorrow, or freeze solid again tonight. The ice is always changing. And through thousands of careful observations, Arctic cultures come to understand that the landscape itself is constantly teaching. Storms teach preparation. Ice teaches caution. Animals teach patience. The environment becomes a classroom without walls, and those who pay attention graduate slowly into something remarkable. A deep, intuitive understanding of one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth, not written in books, not stored in machines, but carried quietly in the minds of those who have listened to the ice long enough to hear its lessons. Long before engines and snowmobiles crossed the tundra, another partnership made Arctic life possible. Dogs with thick fur and tireless endurance became companions, workers, and trusted guides across the frozen world. Together, humans and animals formed travelling teams capable of crossing distances that would otherwise take weeks on foot. In this quiet alliance, survival became a shared effort between species. You hear them before you see them. A low chorus of excited barks drifting across the frozen air. Soon a small team of sled dogs appears along the horizon, their bodies moving with effortless rhythm across the snow. Thick fur shields them from the cold. Their breath forms white clouds as they run. Behind them, a sled glides smoothly across the surface. For thousands of years, this partnership between humans and dogs has shaped Arctic travel. Dogs possess natural advantages perfectly suited to this environment. Their dense coats trap warmth, even during the coldest nights. Their paws distribute weight across the snow, allowing them to run where humans might sink deeply. But their most remarkable trait is endurance. A well-trained sled dog can travel enormous distances across snow and ice, pulling loads that would exhaust human muscles alone. You imagine travelling with such a team now. The sled moves steadily forward, guided by a person standing at the rear runners. Subtle commands direct the dogs left or right as they navigate the landscape. The journey becomes almost hypnotic. The rhythmic padding of paws, the soft whisper of sled runners sliding across packed snow. The distant horizon slowly approaching. Dogs become more than transportation. They become companions. Hunters trust them to detect approaching animals. Travellers rely on their instincts during storms when visibility disappears entirely. There are stories of sled dogs guiding lost travellers safely back to camp when blizzards erased all landmarks. In many Arctic cultures, these animals are treated with deep respect. Their strength and loyalty make them essential members of the community. Puppies are raised carefully, learning commands and teamwork from older dogs. Experienced leaders guide the team, setting pace and direction while younger dogs follow their example. The system becomes remarkably efficient. Together, humans and dogs create a transportation network capable of connecting distant communities across enormous Arctic distances. Trade routes expand. Hunting territories grow larger. Families can travel safely between seasonal camps. Think about the elegance of this partnership. No engines, no fuel, only muscle, trust, and shared purpose. The dogs provide strength and endurance. The humans provide guidance and care. Together they move across landscapes that might otherwise remain inaccessible. You watch the team disappear slowly into the distance, their forms growing smaller against the white horizon. For a moment, the Arctic seems almost silent again, but the tracks they leave behind tell a quiet story. A story of cooperation between species, a reminder that survival in the frozen north was never achieved alone. Sometimes the most important alliances are formed not only between people, but between humans and the animals who share their world. Stand in the middle of the tundra and look around. The horizon stretches in every direction, almost perfectly flat. No forests, few mountains, very few landmarks at all. And yet experienced travellers move through this landscape with remarkable certainty. They read the position of the sun, the shape of drifting snow, even the direction of prevailing winds. In a land where maps once did not exist, the world itself becomes the compass. You turn slowly in a wide circle. The tundra stretches endlessly outward. White ground, pale sky. A distant line where the two quietly meet. To someone unfamiliar with this landscape, navigation might feel impossible. Without obvious landmarks, every direction appears nearly identical. But Arctic travellers rarely become lost. Their navigation system relies on subtle environmental signals that most outsiders overlook entirely. The sun provides the first clue. Even during the long twilight of winter, its faint glow along the horizon reveals direction. During summer, when the sun circles the sky without setting, its position still offers guidance based on time of day. But the sky is only one part of the system. Snow itself becomes another compass. Wind sculpts the snow surface into long ridges known as sastrugi. These formations align with prevailing wind directions, creating patterns that experienced travellers learn to interpret instantly. You kneel beside one such ridge now. Its sharp edge points steadily toward the direction from which the wind most frequently blows. By reading these formations, a traveller can determine orientation even when the sky becomes hidden by clouds. Animals also provide clues. Caribou migration paths follow ancient routes that often lead between seasonal feeding grounds. Following these trails can guide travellers across enormous stretches of tundra. Even subtle landscape variations help. A slight dip in the land might mark the course of a buried river. A darker patch of vegetation might reveal a sheltered valley. Over time, Arctic travellers build detailed mental maps of these features. Think about how powerful this skill becomes. Without written charts or digital navigation tools, individuals memorize thousands of environmental cues that together form an incredibly accurate system of orientation. Memory becomes a map. Observation becomes a compass. You begin walking again, imagining how a skilled traveller would move confidently through this landscape. Every small detail adds information. Wind patterns, snow texture. the faint curve of distant hills barely visible against the sky, the land itself becomes a guide. And in a world where visibility can disappear suddenly during storms, this deep familiarity with the environment becomes one of the most important survival skills of all. Because in the Arctic, knowing where you are can mean everything. Fire is precious in the Arctic, but it is not always available. Sometimes the cold wind makes flames impossible to maintain, so people discover other methods of preserving heat. Shelter placement, layered clothing, shared body warmth, and clever insulation allow communities to survive even when fire disappears temporarily. The secret lies not in defeating the cold, but in slowing the escape of warmth. You stand outside in the deep Arctic wind. The temperature has fallen dramatically, and tonight there will be no fire. Fuel is scarce, the wind too strong. Yet the community around you remains calm, because warmth can come from many sources. The most important of these is the human body itself. Every person constantly produces heat through metabolism. Muscles generate warmth through movement. Even quiet breathing releases small amounts of heat into the surrounding air. The challenge in the Arctic is not creating warmth. It is keeping it from escaping. Clothing provides the first barrier. Layers of fur trap air close to the body, slowing heat loss. When properly constructed, these garments create small pockets of warmth that move with the wearer. Shelters provide the second barrier. Snow structures block wind and trap rising heat inside enclosed spaces. Even a small tent made from animal skins can create a surprisingly stable microclimate compared to the open tundra. People themselves provide another source of warmth. Families sleep close together during extremely cold nights, allowing shared body heat to accumulate inside the shelter. This simple method can significantly raise the temperature within the sleeping space. Even posture matters. Travellers learn to tuck hands beneath arms and curl slightly to reduce exposed surface area. Every detail contributes to preserving precious heat. Think about how this strategy reflects deep understanding of thermodynamics long before scientific language existed to describe it. Warm air rises. Moving air carries heat away. Insulated spaces slow energy transfer. Arctic cultures applied these principles intuitively through observation and experience. You step inside a shelter where several people rest quietly. Outside, the wind howls across the frozen land, but inside the air feels calm, not warm like a modern heated room, but safe, comfortable enough for sleep, comfortable enough for life. The cold still surrounds the shelter, but it has been slowed, contained, and sometimes that is enough. Along Arctic coastlines, a slender vessel appears that seems almost impossibly small for the vast ocean surrounding it. The kayak, crafted from driftwood frames and tightly stretched animal skins, allows hunters to move silently across cold waters. Balanced with extraordinary precision, it becomes one of the most efficient watercraft ever designed, perfectly adapted for navigating icy seas where larger boats could never travel safely. You stand at the edge of the Arctic shoreline as gentle waves lap against the ice. Beside you rests a narrow boat, long and slender, its frame carefully covered with tightly stretched animal skins sealed against water. This is the kayak. At first glance it seems fragile, but its design represents centuries of refinement. Driftwood forms the internal skeleton, shaped into a lightweight frame strong enough to withstand ocean movement. Animal skins, often from seals, are stretched across the structure and sealed with natural oils, creating a waterproof outer layer. The result is a vessel both flexible and durable. You imagine sliding into the narrow cockpit. Your body fits snugly inside, protected by a watertight seal, where clothing connects with the boat's rim. A double-bladed paddle dips gently into the water. The kayak moves forward, almost silently. This silence becomes essential for hunting. Seals resting near the surface or along ice edges can detect disturbances easily. Large boats would frighten them away long before a hunter approached, but the kayak glides quietly across the water, allowing hunters to move close enough for successful hunts. Its narrow shape also offers another advantage: stability. Although it appears delicate, the kayak's low centre of gravity allows experienced paddlers to balance skillfully even in rough conditions. If the boat capsizes, many paddlers can perform a rolling manoeuvre that rights the kayak without leaving the cockpit. This ability becomes vital in icy waters, where immersion could quickly lead to hypothermia. Think about the elegance of this design. Minimal materials, maximum efficiency. A vessel perfectly adapted to the demands of Arctic hunting. You paddle slowly along the edge of drifting ice, feeling the boat respond instantly to each movement. The ocean stretches quietly around you, and in this small craft, human ingenuity once again finds a way to move gracefully through one of Earth's most demanding environments. Spend enough time in the Arctic, and you begin to notice something subtle. The animals often know things before humans do. Birds suddenly change direction. Caribou alter their migration routes. Seals abandon certain ice fields hours before storms arrive. Arctic hunters learn to pay close attention to these signals. The behaviour of animals becomes an early warning system for changes in the environment. You stand quietly on the tundra, the cold air resting gently against your clothing. At first, the landscape appears still, but life is always moving here. In the distance, a small group of birds suddenly lifts into the air, turning sharply toward the south. Their wings beat quickly, their movement purposeful. To someone unfamiliar with the Arctic, this might seem like an ordinary moment. But experienced hunters notice it immediately, because animals often respond to environmental changes long before humans can detect them. A sudden drop in atmospheric pressure can signal an approaching storm. Many animals sense this shift instinctively. Birds may change their flight paths. Caribou may begin moving earlier than expected along their migration routes. Even the seals beneath the sea ice sometimes respond to subtle vibrations or changes in water currents that indicate shifting weather conditions. You imagine travelling beside an elder who has watched these patterns for decades. They pause. Their eyes follow the birds as they disappear into the distance. A storm is coming. Perhaps not immediately, but soon. Modern science confirms that many animals possess sensory abilities far more refined than our own. They can detect changes in air pressure, subtle ground vibrations, or faint sound frequencies that humans cannot easily perceive. These signals help them prepare for environmental shifts. Arctic hunters learn to treat animal behaviour almost like a form of communication. When caribou move unexpectedly, it may indicate changing snow conditions farther north. When foxes begin digging deeper winter dens, colder temperatures may be approaching. When seabirds gather in unusual numbers along certain coastlines, fish populations may be shifting beneath the water. Each observation becomes a small piece of environmental intelligence. You kneel beside a set of fresh tracks pressed into the snow. A fox passed here recently. Its path curves toward a ridge that offers shelter from the wind. Even this small detail reveals something about the weather that may arrive overnight. Over generations, Arctic communities develop deep familiarity with the rhythms of animal life. Not only where animals travel, but how they behave, when they appear restless, when they disappear, when they suddenly move in ways that suggest something unseen is approaching. Think about how closely human survival becomes tied to these observations. Animals are not only sources of food, they are also guides, indicators of environmental change, living sensors scattered across the landscape. You stand quietly again as the wind moves gently across the snow. The birds are gone now, the tundra grows still once more, but somewhere beyond the horizon, clouds may already be forming, and the animals, they sensed it first. For children born into Arctic communities, survival knowledge begins almost immediately. Long before formal education systems exist, young observers watch their parents repair tools, track animals, read the snow, and prepare food. Learning happens quietly, through participation and observation. By the time many children reach adulthood, they carry an understanding of the landscape that outsiders might spend a lifetime trying to learn. You sit near the entrance of a winter shelter and watch a small group of children playing in the snow. At first, their activity looks simple. They chase each other across the frozen ground, leaving scattered footprints in the soft drifts. But even play becomes part of learning here. One child picks up a small bone tool, imitating the careful movements of an adult carving a piece of antler nearby. Another practices pulling a miniature sled across the snow, laughing as it slides unevenly over the surface. These games mirror the skills they will one day need. In Arctic cultures, knowledge is rarely taught through formal lessons. Instead, it is absorbed through observation. Children watch everything. They notice how adults tie sled harnesses, how hunters examine the snow for tracks, how elders study the sky before deciding when to travel. Over time, these observations accumulate. You imagine a young child walking beside their parent across the tundra. The adult pauses beside a set of caribou tracks pressed lightly into the snow. They gesture quietly, explaining how the animal moved, how recently it passed, and which direction it may travel next. The lesson feels natural, not like instruction, just a shared moment of attention. By adolescence, many young people already possess remarkable environmental awareness. They know how to recognize dangerous ice conditions. They understand how to build simple shelters. They can navigate using the sun and wind patterns. These skills develop slowly but steadily, shaped by daily life rather than structured teaching. Think about how powerful this educational system becomes. Instead of separating learning from living, Arctic cultures blend them together completely. Every hunt becomes a lesson. Every journey across the tundra becomes a classroom. Every story told during the long winter night carries practical information about survival. You watch the children again as they move across the snow. Their laughter carries lightly through the cold air. One day they will grow into hunters, toolmakers, storytellers, and elders themselves. And the knowledge they absorb now will guide their decisions when they stand alone on the frozen land. Because in the Arctic, education does not happen inside buildings. It happens everywhere, across the snow, across the ice, across the quiet landscapes where survival itself becomes the teacher. The Arctic has never been completely stable. Over thousands of years, temperatures shift slowly, ice sheets expand and retreat, sea ice patterns change. These environmental transitions sometimes force communities to adapt their travel routes, hunting strategies, and seasonal migrations. The ability to respond flexibly to changing conditions becomes another key element of Arctic survival. You stand beside the edge of a melting river during early spring. Small cracks spread slowly across the surface ice, revealing dark water flowing beneath. The Arctic may appear timeless, but it is constantly changing. Over the course of thousands of years, Earth's climate moves through cycles of warming and cooling. Ice sheets grow during colder periods and retreat during warmer ones. Ocean currents shift. Animal migration patterns adjust to new environmental conditions. These changes rarely happen suddenly. Instead, they unfold slowly across generations. You imagine an elder describing how the sea ice once formed earlier in the season when they were young, or how certain hunting grounds used by their grandparents now remain open water longer than before. These observations become part of community memory. In many Arctic cultures, environmental knowledge extends back through oral history for centuries. Stories describe unusual winters, years when caribou herds arrived late, seasons when storms arrived earlier than expected. Through these narratives, communities track subtle shifts in climate long before scientific instruments existed to measure them. Modern research confirms that the Arctic has experienced dramatic environmental changes throughout history. At the end of the last ice age, enormous glaciers began melting, raising global sea levels and transforming landscapes across the northern continents. Land bridges disappeared beneath the rising oceans. Coastlines moved, ecosystems shifted. Human communities adapted alongside these changes. Travel routes adjusted to new shorelines. Hunting strategies evolved as different animals moved into newly opened habitats. New technologies developed to navigate changing ice conditions. Flexibility became essential. You walk slowly along the riverbank, watching as the frozen surface continues to break apart under the warming sunlight. Water begins to flow more freely. Birds return to the valley. Life adjusts once again. The Arctic has always been dynamic, a landscape of slow but powerful transformation, and those who live here have learned one of the most important lessons of all. Survival does not come from resisting change, it comes from adapting to it. When you step back and look across the entire history of Arctic survival, something remarkable becomes clear. The people who thrived here did not rely on conquering the environment. Instead, they built a relationship with it. They observed its rhythms, respected its dangers, and adapted their lives to its cycles. In doing so, they discovered a truth that echoes far beyond the Arctic itself. Survival often begins with understanding. You stand once more on the wide Arctic horizon. The wind moves gently across the frozen land, carrying faint grains of snow that sparkle briefly in the low sunlight. This landscape may appear harsh, cold, unforgiving. But for thousands of years, human communities have lived here successfully, not by overpowering the environment, but by learning from it. Observation became their most powerful tool. They watched how animals behaved during changing seasons. They studied the shapes of snow and ice. They listened to the subtle warnings carried by wind and sky. Patience became another essential skill. In the Arctic, rushing often leads to mistakes. Hunters wait quietly beside seal breathing holes for hours. Travellers delay journeys when storms gather along the horizon. Communities store food during times of abundance to prepare for leaner seasons ahead. Respect for nature also shapes cultural traditions. Animals taken during hunts are treated with care and gratitude. Landscapes are approached thoughtfully, with awareness of their power. These attitudes encourage balance rather than domination. You imagine the countless generations who have walked these frozen lands before you. Their footprints long vanished, their shelters melted back into the snow, yet their knowledge continues. It lives within stories, within traditions, within the daily practices of communities that still call the Arctic home. Think about the quiet elegance of that legacy. In one of the most demanding environments on Earth, humans discovered that survival does not require perfect control over nature. It requires understanding, cooperation, adaptation. The wind passes softly across the tundra once more. The sky stretches wide above you. And somewhere in the distance, life continues its slow rhythm across the frozen world. A rhythm that has endured through thousands of winters and may continue long into the future. Stand still for a moment in the Arctic and you begin to notice the wind. It rarely disappears completely. Sometimes it drifts across the snow like a slow breath from the horizon. Other times it roars across the tundra with a force that can reshape entire landscapes overnight. Over centuries, Arctic communities learned that the wind was not simply weather. It was an architect sculpting the snow, guiding animal movement, and quietly shaping the strategies humans used to survive in this frozen world. You pause and allow the air to move around you. At first, the wind feels gentle, brushing across the surface of your clothing like a cool hand. But in the Arctic, even a soft wind carries enormous influence. Temperature alone does not determine how cold a place feels. Wind pulls warmth away from the body, carrying heat off the skin faster than still air ever could. This phenomenon is known today as wind chill. Long before the term existed, Arctic travellers understood its effects instinctively. They knew that a calm day at a very low temperature could sometimes feel more comfortable than a slightly warmer day filled with strong winds. So the wind becomes something to study. You look across the snow and notice long ridges stretching across the surface. These formations, carved slowly by steady winds, reveal the direction the air has been travelling for days, sometimes weeks. The snow itself becomes a record of atmospheric movement. These ridges are called sastrugi. Travellers learn to read them like pages in a book. A sharp ridge may indicate recent strong winds. A softened one may reveal calmer weather settling across the tundra. But the wind does more than shape the snow. It shapes life. Animals adjust their movements to avoid exposed ridgelines where wind removes precious body heat. They travel along sheltered valleys and behind natural barriers where the air moves more slowly. Human communities learn the same lessons. Shelters are positioned carefully, often on the leeward side of hills or snowbanks where wind strength is reduced. Snow walls are built to redirect air currents away from living spaces. Even travel routes adapt to the wind. Certain valleys offer natural corridors where winds are less severe. Ice fields exposed to powerful gusts become dangerous places to linger. You imagine walking beside an experienced traveller who pauses suddenly. They lift their face toward the breeze. The wind is shifting. A storm may be forming somewhere beyond the horizon. Modern meteorology explains these patterns through pressure systems and atmospheric circulation. But Arctic communities learn to recognize the signs through careful observation. A sudden rise in wind speed, a change in direction, a faint increase in moisture carried in the air. All of these clues help predict weather changes before clouds even appear. Think about how important that knowledge becomes. In an environment where storms can reduce visibility to almost nothing, early warning can mean the difference between reaching shelter safely or becoming lost in blowing snow. The wind may feel invisible, but its presence shapes nearly every decision made in the Arctic. You stand quietly as the breeze strengthens slightly, carrying tiny crystals of snow across the tundra in glittering waves. They swirl around your boots before disappearing again into the wide open distance. And in that constant movement, The Arctic reveals one of its quiet truths. The wind is never just air. It is a force that sculpts the land, guides the animals, and teaches humans how to move carefully through one of the most demanding climates on Earth. During the deepest months of winter, rivers across the Arctic transform into long ribbons of ice stretching across the tundra. Water that once rushed through valleys becomes a silent pathway connecting distant landscapes. For travellers moving through the Arctic, these frozen rivers become natural roads, smoother than the surrounding terrain and often safer to follow. In a world without maps, these icy corridors quietly guide journeys across immense distances. You step onto the surface of a frozen river. The ice stretches ahead like a pale road disappearing into the horizon. Beneath your feet, the once moving water now rests in solid stillness, locked beneath thick layers of winter ice. In warmer seasons, these rivers rush with powerful currents. But when winter arrives, the Arctic cold transforms them completely. As temperatures fall far below freezing, the water near the surface begins to crystallize. Thin sheets of ice form along the edges first, slowly extending toward the center until the entire river freezes solid. Over time, snowfall adds another layer above the ice, smoothing the surface and filling small cracks. The result is a natural travel corridor. Compared to the uneven tundra surrounding it, a frozen river offers a relatively flat and predictable path. Travel becomes easier. Sleds glide more smoothly. Foot travel requires less effort. You imagine following one of these frozen highways deep into the landscape. The river curves gently through the tundra, passing between low hills and frozen forests. Along its banks, animal tracks crisscross the snow. Caribou have travelled here. Foxes, wolves, even animals recognize the advantages of these natural routes. Human travellers learn the same lesson. Rivers often connect important seasonal locations, hunting grounds, coastal camps, inland valleys where animals migrate during warmer months. By following river paths, communities can navigate large distances while maintaining reliable orientation. Think about how useful this becomes in a landscape with few landmarks. Even when storms obscure the sky and flatten the horizon into a white blur, the river's gentle curve still provides direction. Of course, frozen rivers also carry risks. Ice thickness can vary depending on water flow beneath the surface. In certain areas, fast currents prevent complete freezing, creating hidden weak spots. Experienced travellers learn to recognise these dangers. Slight colour differences in the ice, areas where snow appears thinner, subtle cracking sounds beneath their feet. These signals help determine which areas remain safe to cross. You kneel and place a hand against the cold surface. Beneath this frozen layer, water may still be moving slowly in the darkness below. The river sleeps, but it is never completely still. Yet for much of the Arctic winter, these frozen waterways provide essential connections between distant regions. They guide travellers across vast tundra landscapes. They allow trade and communication between communities separated by hundreds of miles. And as you continue walking along the frozen channel, the river beneath you carries a quiet reminder, even when nature appears completely still. It often continues guiding the journey. Light behaves differently in the far north. The sun never climbs high above the horizon. Even during summer and during winter it disappears entirely. As a result, the Arctic sky often fills with unusual colours, pale gold sunsets that last for hours, violet shadows stretching across snowfields, and soft blue twilight that seems to linger endlessly. These shifting colours become familiar companions to the people who live beneath them. You look up at the sky as the sun drifts slowly along the edge of the horizon. In most places on Earth, the sun rises quickly, climbs high overhead, and then disappears again within a predictable rhythm. But in the Arctic, sunlight behaves differently. Because of the tilt of Earth's axis, the sun travels across the sky at a much lower angle near the poles. Even during summer, it never climbs high above the horizon. Instead, it circles the sky slowly, casting long, horizontal beams of light across the land. This low angle transforms the colours of the landscape. Sunsets stretch for hours instead of minutes. Soft, golden light spreads across the snowfields, blending gradually into pink and violet hues as the atmosphere bends the sunlight through long layers of air. Snow reflects these colours beautifully. Entire valleys glow with soft shades of blue and lavender during twilight. Shadows become long and delicate, stretching across the tundra like painted brushstrokes. You walk slowly through this glowing landscape. The world feels quieter under this gentle light. Scientists explain these colours through atmospheric scattering. When sunlight passes through thick layers of atmosphere near the horizon, shorter wavelengths of blue light scatter away, allowing reds and golds to dominate the sky. But while science explains the mechanics, the experience itself remains almost dreamlike. Arctic communities grow familiar with these colours over generations. They learn to recognise subtle variations that reveal changes in weather or season. A deep red glow at sunset might indicate moisture building in the atmosphere. A pale green tint along the horizon sometimes appears before certain snowstorms. Even the brightness of twilight offers clues about the position of the sun below the horizon. You pause beside a ridge of snow as the sky slowly shifts from gold to violet. The colours change gradually, almost too slowly to notice moment by moment. But after an hour, the transformation becomes clear. This gentle pacing shapes the emotional rhythm of Arctic life. Days feel longer, transitions feel softer. Light fades not abruptly but slowly, inviting quiet reflection. Think about how this constant interplay of light and colour influences the human experience of time itself. When daylight lingers for hours in delicate shades of amber and rose, the world feels calmer, less hurried, and as the final light fades into a deep blue twilight, the Arctic reveals another quiet secret. Even in a place defined by cold and darkness, the sky never stops painting. The Arctic may appear empty from a distance, but life thrives here in quiet abundance. Musk oxen move slowly across the tundra in protective circles. Arctic foxes slip silently between snowdrifts. Polar bears roam vast distances across sea ice. Each species carries its own survival strategy shaped by thousands of years of adaptation to cold, and for the human communities living here, these animals become both neighbours and essential partners in survival. You watch a group of musk oxen gathered across a windswept plain. Their thick coats ripple gently in the cold breeze. When danger approaches, they form a protective circle, horns facing outward, shielding the young within the centre. This behaviour has evolved through countless generations of survival in harsh conditions. Many Arctic animals possess extraordinary adaptations that allow them to thrive where few others can survive. Arctic foxes grow thick winter fur that changes colour with the seasons, blending into the snow for camouflage. Their small ears reduce heat loss, while fur-covered paws act like natural snowshoes. Polar bears roam across vast sea ice fields, their massive bodies insulated by layers of fat and dense fur. They can swim long distances in freezing water, hunting seals that surface through breathing holes in the ice. Even smaller animals display remarkable adaptations. Lemmings burrow beneath snow layers, creating insulated tunnels where temperatures remain far warmer than the surface above. Birds migrate thousands of miles each year to take advantage of the Arctic summer's brief explosion of life. You imagine walking quietly through this ecosystem. Each species plays a role in the complex web of Arctic survival. Caribou migrations feed predators and human hunters alike. Seals sustain polar bears and coastal communities. Birds disperse seeds across tundra landscapes during summer months. Human communities become part of this network as well. Their hunting practices reflect deep understanding of animal behaviour and population balance. Successful hunters observe migration patterns carefully, ensuring that hunts occur in ways that allow animal populations to recover. Respect for animals becomes woven into cultural traditions. Stories often portray animals not simply as prey, but as intelligent participants within the Arctic ecosystem. Think about how remarkable this relationship becomes. Instead of separating humans from nature, Arctic cultures view themselves as members of a shared environment. The animals teach survival strategies. The land provides shelter. Humans adapt their lives to these rhythms. You watch the musk oxen slowly move across the plain once more, their heavy hooves pressing deep prints into the snow. The tundra may appear quiet, but beneath that silence countless lives continue moving through the frozen world together. So now, as the frozen landscapes begin to fade quietly from your imagination, take a moment to step back across the long arc of time you've just wandered through. Across thousands of years, through countless winters and returning summers, human beings learned something extraordinary in the Arctic. They did not conquer the cold, they listened to it. They watched the snow, the sky, the animals, and the slow shifting of sea ice. They studied the wind that sculpted the land and the quiet rivers that turned into winter roads. They learned how to dress warmth around the body, how to shape shelter from snow itself, and how to share food so that no one faced the long winter alone. Every generation added a small piece of understanding, a better tool, a safer travel route, a deeper story about the land and its rhythms, and slowly, over centuries of careful attention, survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth became possible. When you think about it that way, the Arctic is not simply a frozen wilderness, it is a record of human patience, a reminder that knowledge does not always arrive through sudden discoveries or dramatic inventions. Sometimes it grows quietly, observation after observation, winter after winter. Think for a moment about how fragile that knowledge once was. It lived in memory, in stories told beside small lamps during the long night, in the careful hands of people teaching children how to read the snow or listen for the distant sounds of moving ice. Yet through all that time, it endured, and even today, many Arctic communities continue carrying that wisdom forward, blending ancient understanding with the changing realities of the modern world. The wind still moves across the tundra, the sea ice still forms and breaks, caribou still travel their ancient routes across the wide northern plains, and beneath the same vast sky, people still live in rhythm with the land that taught their ancestors how to survive. So as you settle into your own moment in time tonight, far from those frozen horizons, let the Arctic drift gently into the quiet. Let the wind soften, let the snow-covered plains fade into darkness. You are part of the same long story that stretches across billions of years of Earth's history. A brief moment in a world that has seen glaciers rise and fall, oceans open and close, and human footsteps slowly reach even the coldest corners of the planet. And for now, your journey through that ancient frozen world can rest. The land is still there, the wind still moving softly across the snow, but the night around you is warm, and sleep like the long Arctic winter is waiting quietly.